Before we begin this incredible true story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon, so you never miss out on amazing real-life stories like this one. Your support means everything to us. The evening started like any other Friday night in the small town of Ashford. The Golden Lion pub was packed with locals enjoying their weekend, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the warm air. Behind the bar, glasses clinked as the bartender poured drinks, while groups of friends gathered around wooden tables that had witnessed countless stories over the years. In the corner booth sat Marcus Thompson, a 32-year-old man who looked like any other patron enjoying a quiet pint. He wore simple jeans and a dark sweater, his brown hair neatly trimmed. To anyone watching, he seemed unremarkable, just another working man unwinding after a long week. But Marcus carried a secret that none of the other customers knew. For the past 8 years, he had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace, one of the elite soldiers tasked with protecting the British royal family. Marcus took a slow sip of his beer, savoring the bitter taste. These moments of normalcy were precious to him. During his duty hours, he stood motionless for hours in his iconic red uniform and bearskin hat, a living statue that tourists photographed by the thousands. The discipline required was immense. He could not smile, could not react to jokes or provocations, could not even scratch an itch. But tonight, he was just Marcus, not a royal guard. Tonight, he could be himself. His friend David sat across from him, talking about his new job at the local garage. Marcus nodded along, genuinely interested in the mundane details of regular life. David had no idea about Marcus's real profession. As far as his childhood friend knew, Marcus worked security at a government building in London. It was easier that way. Less questions, less attention. The pub door swung open, bringing in a gust of cold November air. 3 men walked in, and something about them immediately caught Marcus's trained eye. They moved with a nervous energy, their eyes scanning the room too carefully. The tallest one, wearing a leather jacket, seemed to be the leader. He had a thin scar running down his left cheek and cold, calculating eyes. The other 2 flanked him, younger and clearly following his lead. Marcus watched them without appearing to watch, skill he had perfected over years of training. They moved to the bar, ordered drinks, but their attention was not on their beverages. They were looking at people, studying faces, searching for someone. David continued talking, unaware of Marcus's divided attention. Marcus made appropriate responses, laughed at the right moments, but part of his mind remained alert. Old habits died hard, even off-duty, even in civilian clothes. His training never truly switched off. The 3 men moved away from the bar, drinks in hand, and positioned themselves near the entrance. The leader pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. Marcus noticed the way his jacket hung slightly heavier on one side. Years of weapons training told him exactly what that meant. The man was armed. Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly, but his breathing remained steady. He had been in dangerous situations before, had trained for every possible scenario, but this was different. This was his hometown, his local pub, surrounded by innocent people who had no idea what might be unfolding. A young woman entered the pub, probably in her mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a server's uniform from the restaurant down the street, clearly stopping in for a quick drink after her shift. She looked tired but happy, smiling at the bartender who knew her by name. The 3 men's attention immediately locked onto her. The leader straightened, his expression changing from watchful to predatory. He whispered something to his companions, and they spread out slightly. Positioning themselves strategically around the room, Marcus's pulse quickened. Something was very wrong. The woman ordered a glass of wine, completely oblivious to the attention she had attracted. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages while she waited for her drink. One of the younger men, wearing a dark hoodie, began moving toward her. His hand moved to his pocket, fingers closing around something. Marcus could see the outline through the fabric. Another weapon, smaller, probably a knife. David was in the middle of a story about a difficult customer when Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. His friend looked surprised, even a bit hurt. But Marcus's eyes were locked on the unfolding situation. The woman received her wine, thanked the bartender, and turned to find a seat. As she moved, the man in the hoodie positioned himself to intercept her path. The leader and the third man closed in from different angles, boxing her in without her realizing it. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. He was off duty, not in uniform, and technically had no more authority here than any other civilian. But he was trained in hand-to-hand combat, weapons disarmament, and crisis management. More importantly, he had taken an oath to protect innocent people, and that oath did not end when he took off his uniform. The woman stopped, suddenly aware that 3 men had surrounded her. Her smile faded, replaced by confusion and then growing fear. The leader stepped closer, saying something Marcus could not hear over the noise of the pub. Whatever he said made her face go pale. Marcus slowly stood up, his movements casual and unhurried. David looked up at him, questioning. Marcus gave him a slight shake of his head, a silent message to stay put and stay quiet. His friend, knowing him since childhood, recognized that look. Something serious was happening. The leader's hand moved toward his jacket, toward that telltale weight. The woman stepped back, her wine glass trembling in her hand. Other patrons were beginning to notice now, conversations dying down as the tension became palpable. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, weaving between tables and people without drawing attention to himself. His years of training had taught him how to move efficiently, how to position his body to maximize effectiveness while minimizing threat display. He appeared casual, just another patron making his way across the pub. But every muscle in his body was coiled and ready. The woman's name was Sarah Collins, though Marcus did not know this yet. She worked double shifts at the Italian restaurant 3 doors down, saving money to finish her nursing degree. She had stopped at the Golden Lion because it was familiar, safe. It's a place where she had shared laughs with friends dozens of times. Now that safety had shattered, replaced by 3 pairs of hostile eyes and words that made her blood run cold. The leader, whose name was Victor Kane, had spoken quietly, but with unmistakable menace. He told her she knew what this was about, that her brother owed money and that one way or another, the debt would be paid tonight. Sarah's younger brother, Tommy, had fallen in with the wrong crowd 6 months ago. She had tried to help him, tried to get him away from the drugs and the people who sold them, but Tommy was stubborn. Now his mistakes were standing in front of her, demanding £20,000 she did not have. Marcus was now 5 feet away, close enough to hear Victor's low, threatening voice. The man's hand was inside his jacket, fingers wrapped around something metallic. The 2 younger men, whose names were Jake and Danny, had moved to block any escape route Sarah might take. Other pub patrons were watching now, uncertain whether to intervene or stay out of it. The bartender had his hand on the phone, ready to call the police. But knowing that help would take precious minutes to arrive, Victor leaned closer to Sarah, his breath reeking of cigarettes and beer. He told her she had 1 hour to contact her brother to get him here with the money, or she would pay the price instead. His hand emerged from his jacket just enough for her to see the black handle of a pistol. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the wooden floor. The crash drew everyone's attention, creating a moment of frozen silence. That was when Marcus acted. He had assessed the situation, calculated the risks, and made his decision in the split second that glass hit the floor. He moved with explosive speed that seemed impossible for someone who had appeared so relaxed moments before. His hand shot out, grabbing Victor's wrist before the man could fully draw his weapon. Marcus twisted sharply, using a technique drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. The motion was precise, controlled. Designed to disarm without causing permanent injury, Victor cried out in pain and surprise as the gun clattered to the floor, skidding under a nearby table. His 2 companions reacted instantly, Jake reaching for his knife while Danny lunged at Marcus from the side. But Marcus was already moving, his body responding with muscle memory built through years of combat training. He released Victor's wrist and stepped back, creating space, positioning Sarah behind him with one smooth motion. Jake's knife came out, a 4-inch blade that gleamed under the pub lights. He slashed forward, aiming for Marcus's chest, but Marcus was not there anymore. He had pivoted, letting the blade pass harmlessly through empty air, and brought his elbow up in a sharp arc that connected with Jake's jaw. The young man's head snapped back, his eyes rolling as he stumbled into a table. The knife fell from his limp fingers as he collapsed, conscious but dazed. Danny was bigger than Jake, heavier, and he tried to use his weight advantage. He wrapped his arms around Marcus from behind, attempting to pin his arms and immobilize him. It was a reasonable strategy against most opponents, but Marcus was not most opponents. He had trained with the SAS, had learned from the best fighters in the British military. He dropped his weight suddenly, breaking Danny's center of gravity, then drove his heel down on the man's instep. Danny's grip loosened with a grunt of pain, and Marcus drove his head backward, connecting with Danny's nose. There was a sickening crunch, and Danny released him completely. Hands flying to his bleeding face. The entire sequence had taken less than 10 seconds. 3 armed men, neutralized without a single shot fired, without any bystanders hurt. The pub had erupted in chaos, people screaming, chairs scraping as patrons tried to get away from the violence, but Marcus remained calm. He kicked the knife away from Jake's reach and moved quickly to where Victor's gun had slid under the table. Victor was clutching his wrist, his face twisted in rage and pain. He reached into his jacket with his other hand, and Marcus realized with cold certainty that there was a second weapon. Time seemed to slow as Victor's hand emerged, holding another pistol smaller than the first. His finger finding the trigger as he brought it up toward Marcus. Marcus dove forward, closing the distance before Victor could aim properly. His shoulder drove into the man's midsection, using his body weight to slam Victor against the wooden pillar that supported the pub's low ceiling. The gun fired deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. But the bullet went high, embedding itself in the ceiling and sending splinters of wood raining down. Women screamed, men shouted, and somewhere in the background, Marcus could hear David yelling his name. Marcus's hand closed around Victor's gun hand, forcing it upward, away from anyone who might be in the line of fire. His other hand delivered a short, powerful punch to Victor's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs. Victor's grip weakened, and Marcus twisted the gun free, immediately dropping the magazine and clearing the chamber with practiced efficiency. The weapon was now harmless, and he tossed it behind the bar. Out of reach, Victor slumped against the pillar, gasping for breath, defeated. Marcus turned to check on Sarah, who stood frozen where he had positioned her, her face white with shock but unharmed. Jake was still on the ground, holding his jaw and moaning. Danny sat against the wall, blood streaming from his broken nose, looking at Marcus with fear and confusion. The aftermath of violence is always strange, Marcus thought, as the pub slowly transitioned from chaos to stunned silence. People who had been screaming moments ago now stood frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. The bartender still held the phone, his mouth open, having forgotten to actually dial the emergency services. David stared at his childhood friend with wide eyes, seeing someone he thought he knew in an entirely new light. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing his heart rate to slow, bringing himself back under control. The adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but years of training helped him manage it. He checked each of the 3 men again, ensuring they posed no further threat. Victor remained slumped against the pillar, clutching his stomach and wheezing. Jake had managed to sit up but made no move to continue fighting. Danny just stared at the blood on his hands. Flowing from his shattered nose, Sarah finally moved, taking a shaky step toward Marcus. Her voice came out as barely a whisper when she spoke, thanking him, asking him who he was and how he had moved like that. Before Marcus could respond, the pub door burst open and 2 uniformed police officers rushed in, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning for threats. The bartender, finally remembering his phone, shouted that everything was under control now, that the dangerous men were down, and that a customer had saved everyone. The officers took in the scene, their training evident in how quickly they assessed the situation. One moved to secure the weapons, while the other began checking the injured, men and asking for witnesses. Marcus raised his hands slowly, keeping them visible, knowing how police responded to situations involving violence and weapons. He explained calmly that he was the one who had intervened, that these 3 men had threatened the young woman with firearms, and that he had acted to protect her and the other customers. His voice was steady, authoritative in a way that made the officers pause and really look at him. The senior officer, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and gray, streaking her dark hair, asked Marcus his name and occupation. When he told her he was a royal guard stationed at Buckingham Palace, her eyebrows rose. She asked for identification, and Marcus carefully reached into his wallet, producing not just his driver's license, but his military ID and palace security credentials. The officer studied them carefully and looked at him with new respect. More police arrived within minutes, along with paramedics who began treating the injured men. Jake's jaw was not broken, but badly bruised. Danny's nose would need to be reset. Victor had bruised ribs and a sprained wrist. None of their injuries were life-threatening, which spoke to Marcus's precision and control even in the heat of combat. He could have hurt them much worse, could have used lethal force, given that they were armed. But his training emphasized minimum, necessary force. Sarah gave her statement to one officer, while Marcus gave his to another. She explained about her brother Tommy, about the drug debt, about how these men had cornered her and threatened her life. She had never seen them before tonight, she said. But Victor had known things about Tommy that proved he was telling the truth about the debt. Her hands shook as she spoke, the reality of how close she had come to serious harm finally sinking in. David approached the officer interviewing Marcus, explaining that he was Marcus's friend and had witnessed everything. He described how Marcus had noticed something wrong before anyone else, how he had moved to intervene, how his actions had likely saved Sarah's life. David's voice held awe and confusion, still trying to reconcile the quiet friend he knew with the skilled fighter he had just watched in action. The senior officer, Day, made several phone calls, speaking to her superiors and apparently to someone at the palace security office. Marcus stood patiently, answering every question, providing every detail. He had nothing to hide. His actions had been lawful, necessary, and executed with appropriate force. The weapons were real, the threats were credible, and multiple witnesses could confirm that he had acted in defense of another person. Victor Kane was coming around now, his breathing easier, though his face was twisted with pain and anger. When the officers began reading him his rights, he started shouting that Marcus had assaulted him, that he was going to sue, that he had just been talking to the girl and this maniac had attacked them without provocation. His two companions remained silent, smart enough to know that making accusations would only make things worse for them. The senior officer listened to Victor's rants without expression, then calmly informed him that multiple witnesses had seen him draw a weapon on an unarmed woman, that the pub's security cameras had recorded everything, and that he was being arrested for illegal possession of firearms, threatening behavior, and attempted extortion. She listed the charges in a flat, professional voice, while Victor's face went from angry red to pale white as he realized the severity of his situation. The pub's security footage was indeed comprehensive. The bartender brought out the recording on a laptop, and the officers watched the entire incident unfold from multiple angles. The video showed clearly how Victor and his men had cornered Sarah, how Victor had displayed his weapon, how Sarah had dropped her glass in fear. It showed Marcus's intervention, every movement recorded in clear detail. The footage also captured the moment Victor had drawn his second gun and fired at Marcus, proving beyond any doubt that lethal force had been directed at him. One of the younger officers, a man in his late 20s, watched the footage 3 times, his expression growing more amazed with each viewing. He commented that he had never seen anyone move like that outside of movies, that Marcus's technique was flawless, that he had controlled 3 armed men without causing serious injury to anyone. The admiration in his voice was clear, and several other officers nodded in agreement. Sarah approached Marcus again once her statement was complete. She was crying now, the delayed shock hitting her hard, and she thanked him repeatedly. She told him about Tommy, about how her little brother had started using drugs after their father died, how she had been trying to help him get clean, how she had no idea the debt had gotten so large or so dangerous. Marcus listened patiently, his expression sympathetic. He had seen addiction destroy families before, knew how drugs could turn good people into desperate ones. Marcus suggested gently that Sarah should contact Tommy immediately, that he needed to know his debts had put her in danger. that he needed help before something worse happened. She nodded, wiping her tears, and pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Marcus gave her some space, turning his attention back to the police officers who had more questions for him. The police station was bustling with activity when Marcus arrived to give his formal statement. Though the senior officer at the pub had been satisfied with his account, protocol required a more detailed interview at the station. Marcus did not mind. He understood procedure, respected it, knew that thorough documentation would protect both him and Sarah from any future legal complications. Detective Inspector Claire Morrison met him in the lobby. She was a 15-year veteran of the force, known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to see through lies. She had been called in specifically for this case because Victor Kane was not just any criminal. He was a mid-level drug dealer who had been on their radar for 3 years, always managing to stay just out of reach, always one step ahead of their investigations. Tonight, thanks to Marcus, they finally had him on charges that would stick. The interview room was plain and functional. With white walls, a metal table, and recording equipment, Detective Morrison offered Marcus's coffee, which he accepted gratefully. The adrenaline had worn off completely now, leaving him feeling the fatigue that always followed intense physical confrontation. She pressed record and began walking him through the evening step by step. From the moment he arrived at the pub to the moment the police took Victor into custody, Marcus answered every question with clarity and precision. His military training had taught him the importance of accurate reporting, distinguishing between what he knew for certain and what he had assumed. He described Victor's behavior, the body language that had first alerted him to danger, the way the men had positioned themselves tactically around Sarah. He explained his decision-making process, why he had chosen to intervene rather than simply alert the authorities, how the speed of the developing threat had required immediate action. Detective Morrison listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or additional detail. She was particularly interested in how Marcus had identified that Victor was armed before the weapon was visible. Marcus explained the subtle signs, the way Victor's jacket hung, the unconscious way he kept his right hand near the weapon, the telltale bulge that an experienced eye could spot. These observations, he noted, were second nature to someone with his background. The detective then showed him photographs taken at the scene, asking him to identify each person and confirm the sequence of events. She showed him close-ups of the weapons recovered, a 9mm pistol, smaller .25 caliber backup gun, and a 4-inch knife. All were illegal to possess without proper licensing, which none of the 3 men had. She also showed him the drugs found in Victor's car, parked outside the pub, over 2 kilograms of cocaine, and a substantial amount of cash. Clearly, the proceeds of drug sales. Marcus learned that Victor Kane had been operating in the area for years, supplying drugs to vulnerable people, often targeting young adults like Tommy Collins. The police had suspected him of violence before, including one assault that had put a man in the hospital, but witnesses had always been too frightened to testify. This time would be different. This time, they had multiple witnesses, clear video evidence, and weapons charges that carried serious prison time. Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with frank curiosity. She told him that in her 15 years on the force, she had never seen a civilian take down 3 armed criminals with such efficiency. She asked about his training, and Marcus gave her a brief overview of his military service before joining the Royal Guard. He had served in the Army for 6 years, including 2 tours in Afghanistan, before being selected for the elite position at the palace. The training for Royal Guards was intensive, Marcus explained. Beyond the ceremonial duties that tourists saw, they were highly skilled soldiers. They trained in close protection, threat assessment, weapons handling, and hand-to-hand combat. They could go from standing perfectly still in their red uniforms to responding to a security threat in seconds. The stillness, the discipline, the awareness it was all preparation for the moment when action was required. Detective Morrison nodded, making notes. She told Marcus that the district attorney would almost certainly not file any charges against him. His actions were clearly justified self-defense and defense of another person. Victor had displayed a weapon and made credible threats. Jake had drawn a knife, and Victor had actually fired a shot at Marcus. Any reasonable person would agree that Marcus had been in imminent danger and had responded appropriately. However, she continued, there would likely be a formal inquiry from his superiors at the palace. Using military training in civilian situations, even justified situations, could be a sensitive matter. Palace security would want to ensure that Marcus had followed proper protocols, that his actions reflected well on the institution he represented. Marcus understood this completely and confirmed he would cooperate fully with any investigation. The interview concluded after nearly 2 hours. Detective Morrison thanked Marcus for his detailed statement and his service both to the country and to Sarah Collins. She walked him back to the lobby, where David had been waiting patiently, scrolling through his phone. His friend stood immediately, concern evident on his face. Asking if everything was all right, Marcus assured him everything was fine. Just routine questions. David drove them back to the pub to collect Marcus's car, the drive passing in contemplative silence. Finally, David spoke, his voice quiet and almost hurt. He asked why Marcus had never told him about his real job, about his military service, about any of it. Marcus sighed. Knowing this conversation was inevitable, he explained that the palace had strict policies about privacy and security. Royal guards were told to keep low profiles in their personal lives, to avoid drawing attention that might compromise their duties. Beyond that, Marcus admitted, he had simply wanted to keep part of his life normal. When he came home to Ashford, he wanted to be just Marcus, not Guardsman Thompson, not a soldier, just a regular guy having a pint with his oldest friend. David was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he smiled slightly and said that explained a lot about Marcus over the years. The strange schedule, the vague answers about work, the unusual level of fitness for someone who supposedly sat at a desk all day. He told Marcus that he understood that he was not angry, just surprised and incredibly impressed by what he had witnessed. Their friendship had survived many things over 20 years. It would survive this revelation too. They reached the pub, which was now closed, crime scene tape still across the door. Marcus's car sat alone in the parking lot under a streetlight. Before getting out, David turned to Marcus and said something that would stay with him for a long time. He said that most people go their whole lives without ever being in the right place at the right time to make a real difference. Tonight, Marcus had been exactly where he needed to be, with exactly the skills necessary to save someone's life. That meant something. That mattered. The morning after the incident, Marcus woke to find his phone flooded with messages. The story had made the local news, and somehow, despite his best efforts to remain anonymous, his name had gotten out. The headlines varied, but the theme was consistent. Off-duty Royal Guard stops armed drug dealer. Palace soldier saves woman in pub confrontation. Hero Guard disarms criminals in local pub. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, drinking coffee and scrolling through the messages. His mother had called 4 times, panicked after seeing the news. His sister had sent a long text expressing her shock and pride. Former military colleagues had reached out, some congratulating him, others checking that he was truly okay. And there were messages from people he barely knew, friends of friends, acquaintances from years ago, all wanting to connect with the local hero. But one message stood out. It was from his commanding officer at Buckingham Palace, Colonel James Hartley. The text was brief and professional. Marcus was to report to the palace at noon for a meeting with senior security officials. The tone was neutral, impossible to read as either positive or negative. Marcus had expected this, but seeing the summons made it real. His actions might have saved lives, but they had also drawn attention to a role that was supposed to remain discreet. He arrived at the palace 30 minutes early. Passing through the security checkpoints he knew so well, other guards on duty nodded to him, some with knowing looks. News traveled fast in their tight-knit community. Everyone knew what had happened in Ashford. Marcus changed into his uniform, the familiar red tunic and dark trousers. The weight of his duty settling onto his shoulders along with the fabric. Colonel Hartley's office overlooked the parade ground, a space where tourists never ventured. The colonel was a career military man in his mid-50s. His posture still parade ground perfect, his gray hair cut with military precision. He had served in the Falklands, Iraq, and Afghanistan before taking this prestigious position. When Marcus entered and saluted, Hartley returned it crisply, then gestured to a chair. 3 other officials sat in the room. Marcus recognized the head of palace security, a stern woman named Margaret Thornton, and the palace's legal counsel, a thin man in an expensive suit whose name Marcus could not recall. The third person was a surprise, Assistant Commissioner Richard Davies from the Metropolitan Police, a high-ranking officer whose presence indicated the seriousness of this meeting. Colonel Hartley began by stating the facts as they understood them. Based on police reports and media accounts, he recounted the incident at the Golden Lion pub with clinical precision, noting the weapons involved, the threat to civilian life, and Marcus's intervention. He then asked Marcus to provide his own account, which Marcus did, standing at attention and delivering his report as he would any military briefing. When Marcus finished, Margaret Thornton spoke. Her voice was sharp, concerned. She pointed out that royal guards were meant to be invisible in public, that drawing attention to themselves or their capabilities could create security vulnerabilities. Marcus's actions, however justified, had now made him recognizable. The palace received thousands of visitors daily, and the last thing they needed was guards becoming celebrity figures or targets for those with ill intentions toward the monarchy, Marcus acknowledged her concerns but respectfully noted that he had not sought publicity. He had acted to protect an innocent person from imminent harm, and he would make the same choice again under identical circumstances. His duty as a soldier, he said, did not end when he left the palace grounds. The oath he had taken was to serve and protect, and that obligation extended to all British citizens, not just the royal family. Assistant Commissioner Davies interjected, his tone more supportive. He stated for the record that the Metropolitan Police were grateful for Marcus's intervention. Victor Kane was a dangerous criminal who had evaded prosecution for years. The evidence collected that night, combined with Kane's actions caught on camera, meant they could finally put him away for a significant period. Moreover, the drugs seized from his vehicle and subsequent raids on properties connected to him had disrupted a major supply network. Marcus's actions had potentially saved numerous lives beyond just Sarah Collins. The legal counsel then addressed the technical aspects. From a legal standpoint, Marcus had acted within his rights as a private citizen. The fact that he was a royal guard was irrelevant to the lawfulness of his actions. He had witnessed a crime in progress, had reasonable belief that serious harm was imminent, and had used proportional force to neutralize the threat. No charges would be filed against him, and the palace had no legal liability for his off-duty actions. Colonel Hartley leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. He asked Marcus a question that went to the heart of the matter. Did Marcus understand that being a royal guard meant sacrifice, including the sacrifice of public recognition? That their role required them to be seen but not known, present but anonymous? That the very skills that made them effective protectors also made them potentially dangerous symbols if those skills became publicly celebrated? Marcus met his commanding officer's eyes and answered honestly. He understood the concerns, understood the need for discretion, but he also understood that their training, their skills, and their sense of duty existed for a purpose beyond ceremony. They were soldiers first, ceremonial figures second. When faced with a clear choice between maintaining anonymity and protecting an innocent life, he would choose to protect every time. If that made him unsuitable for this role, he would accept reassignment without complaint. The room fell silent for a long moment. Then Colonel Hartley did something unexpected. He smiled just slightly and told Marcus to sit down. The colonel explained that they were not here to reprimand him. They were here to ensure that this incident was properly handled, that Marcus understood the implications, and that going forward, everyone was clear on expectations. The palace valued soldiers who took their duties seriously, who acted with courage and judgment under pressure. Those were precisely the qualities they wanted in royal guards. However, Hartley continued, there would be conditions going forward. Marcus would participate in a press briefing, carefully managed by the palace communications team, where he would make a brief statement and then decline further interviews. The narrative would emphasize his training and professionalism while making clear that this was an exceptional circumstance. It's not an invitation for public scrutiny. Marcus would also work with security to assess any potential risks from his increased visibility and adjust his duties accordingly. If necessary, Margaret Thornton added that Marcus would be given additional training in media management and personal security. If his face became recognizable, they needed to ensure that did not create vulnerabilities either for him or for the royal family he protected. She was still not happy about this situation. Her expression made that clear. But she accepted that Marcus had acted appropriately, given the circumstances. The meeting concluded with Assistant Commissioner Davies shaking Marcus's hand and thanking him personally. The commissioner mentioned that the police were considering recommending Marcus for a civilian commendation for bravery. Marcus thanked him but said such recognition was unnecessary. He had simply done what anyone with his training should have done. 3 weeks after the incident at the Golden Lion pub, life had found a new rhythm for Marcus Thompson. The press briefing had gone as well as could be expected. He had worn his full Royal Guard uniform, stood before cameras and reporters, and delivered a carefully prepared statement. He had emphasized that his actions were simply those of any trained soldier witnessing a crime, that he took no pleasure in violence, and that his thoughts were with Sarah Collins and her family as they dealt with the aftermath of that night. The media had been hungry for more, shouting questions about his training, his background, his thoughts on being called a hero, but Marcus had politely declined to elaborate, thanked everyone for their time, and walked away. The palace communications team had been pleased. Marcus had come across as professional, humble, competent without feeding the celebrity aspect that they feared. Sarah Collins had reached out to him through the police. She wanted to thank him properly, she said, and to update him on her situation. They met at a quiet cafe in London, far from Ashford and the memories of that terrible night. Sarah looked better than when he had last seen her, less haunted, though there was still a sadness in her eyes when she spoke about her brother. Tommy had finally agreed to enter rehabilitation after hearing what had happened to his sister. The shock of knowing his drug debt had nearly gotten her killed had broken through his denial and anger. He was at a facility in Scotland now, Sarah told Marcus, working through his addiction with professional help. It would be a long journey, and there were no guarantees of success, but for the first time in months, Sarah had hope. She was also working with the police to provide information about the dealers Tommy had been involved with, helping to build cases that might prevent other families from suffering similar trauma. Marcus listened as Sarah spoke, noting how she seemed stronger now, despite everything she had been through. Trauma could break people, but it could also reveal inner strength they never knew they possessed. Sarah had found hers. She told him she had enrolled back in her nursing program, determined to finish her degree. The restaurant had been supportive, adjusting her schedule to accommodate her classes. She wanted to work in addiction recovery eventually, to help people like Tommy before they reached rock bottom, before they parted. Sarah gave Marcus a small gift, wrapped in simple paper. She insisted he open it there, watching with nervous anticipation. Inside was a handcrafted medal, clearly made by someone with artistic skill but not professional tools. It was copper, engraved with simple words, "True hero for service beyond duty." Sarah explained that her brother had made it during one of his therapy sessions, as part of his process of making amends. He wanted Marcus to know how grateful he was, how sorry he was for the danger his choices had created. Marcus felt emotion tighten his throat as he held the medal. This meant more than any official commendation could. This was personal, heartfelt, a symbol of genuine change and gratitude. He thanked Sarah, told her he would treasure it, and made her promise to keep him updated on Tommy's progress. As they said goodbye, Sarah hugged him tightly, whispering one more thank you before walking away into the London crowds. Back at Buckingham Palace, Marcus had settled into his duties with renewed focus. The attention from the incident had faded from the news cycle, replaced by newer stories and scandals. Tourists still photographed him in his red uniform, still tried to make him smile or react, but they had no idea who he was beyond the ceremonial figure they saw. The anonymity had returned. Marcus was grateful for it. His fellow guards treated him with a mixture of respect and good-natured ribbing. Some joked that they felt safer on duty knowing Marcus was nearby. Others asked for tips on his fighting techniques, which Marcus shared during their training sessions. The incident had reminded everyone that beneath the ceremony and tradition, they were soldiers, and staying sharp mattered. Colonel Hartley had pulled Marcus aside one afternoon. Speaking to him privately in the corridor, the colonel mentioned that Marcus's actions had created an unexpected benefit. Recruitment applications for the Royal Guard had increased significantly, with many citing Marcus's example as inspiration. Young soldiers wanted to be part of a unit that represented both tradition and real capability. The palace was pleased, even if they had been initially concerned about the publicity. The colonel also told Marcus that he was being considered for a commendation from the Queen herself, not for the pub incident specifically, but for his overall service and the way he had represented the guards during a difficult situation. Marcus was humbled by this, but tried not to think about it too much. He had learned long ago that expectations often led to disappointment, and it was better to focus on the work itself rather than recognition. Victor Kane's trial had been scheduled for early spring. Detective Morrison kept Marcus informed of the progress. Kane's lawyers had attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses, clear video footage, illegal weapons, drugs found in his vehicle, and a history of violence all combined to create an airtight case. The prosecution expected a sentence of at least 15 years, possibly more. Jake and Danny had agreed to testify against Kane in exchange for reduced sentences. Having realized that their loyalty to their boss was not reciprocated, David had become something of a local celebrity himself. As the friend who had witnessed everything, he handled it with humor, occasionally texting Marcus's jokes about how he was now known as that guy who drinks with the Royal Guard hero. But beneath the jokes, their friendship had deepened. David had seen Marcus in his truest form that night, had witnessed the courage and skill that Marcus usually kept hidden, and it had strengthened the bond between them. On a cold December evening, Marcus found himself back at the Golden Lion pub for the first time since the incident. The owners had invited him for a small private event, wanting to thank him personally. The bullet hole in the ceiling had been repaired, the broken glass replaced, and life had returned to normal for the small establishment. But they had added something new, a small plaque near the door that read, "In recognition of courage and service with the date of the incident." The pub was filled with familiar faces. David was there, of course, along with the bartender who had witnessed everything, and several regular customers who had been present that night. Sarah had come down from London, bringing Tommy with her. It was Tommy's first outing since leaving rehabilitation, and he looked nervous but determined. He was thin, his eyes still carrying the weight of his struggles. But there was clarity there that Sarah said had been absent for years. Tommy approached Marcus hesitantly, struggling to find words. Finally, he simply said he was sorry, that he understood the danger his addiction had created, that he was working every day to become someone his sister could be proud of. Marcus shook his hand firmly, told him that recovery was the hardest battle anyone could fight, and that choosing to fight it took real courage. They spoke for a while, Marcus sharing some of his own experiences with soldiers who had struggled with post-traumatic stress and addiction after combat, how getting help was strength, not weakness. The evening became a celebration of community, of ordinary people coming together after extraordinary circumstances. There were no speeches, no formal presentations, just conversation and connection. The pub owners gave Marcus a lifetime pass for free drinks, which he accepted with good humor, even though he rarely drank more than 1 pint. Several people approached to shake his hand, to tell him their own stories, to express gratitude that there were still people willing to step up when others were in danger. As the evening wound down, Marcus stood outside the pub for a moment, breathing in the cold night air. He thought about the path that had led him here, from a small-town kid to a soldier, from combat zones to the ceremonial grounds of Buckingham Palace, and finally, to that moment when everything he had learned and trained for converged in 10 seconds of action. He thought about the choices we all make, the small decisions that seem insignificant until suddenly they define us. His choice to pay attention to 3 strangers, to trust his instincts, to act when action was needed. Sarah's choice to stop at the pub instead of going straight home. Tommy's choice to accept help instead of continuing down a destructive path. Victor Kane's choice to threaten innocent people, which had finally led to justice. David emerged from the pub, joining Marcus in the cold. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two friends who had known each other for 20 years, but had discovered new depths to their friendship in recent weeks. David mentioned that he had been thinking about that night often, about how fragile everything was, how quickly normal could become dangerous. Lucky they all were that Marcus had been there. Marcus nodded, but said that luck was only part of it. Training mattered. Awareness mattered. Willingness to act mattered. He had been prepared because he chose to be prepared, had noticed the danger because he chose to stay alert, had intervened because he believed that protecting others was more important than avoiding risk to himself. Those were choices, not luck. The two friends returned inside for one final drink before heading home. As Marcus sat in the same booth where the evening had started weeks ago, he reflected on how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. Tomorrow, he would return to his post at Buckingham Palace, standing motionless in his red uniform while tourists took photographs. He would guard the royal family with the same dedication and skill he had shown that night. And if danger ever arose again, whether on duty or off, he would be ready. Because being a royal guard was not just about the uniform or the ceremony or the tradition. It was about being someone who could be trusted in moments that mattered. Someone who had the skill to act and the judgment to act wisely. Marcus Thompson had proven he was that person, and he would carry that responsibility with quiet pride for the rest of his life. The medal Tommy had made sat in his pocket. A reminder that heroism was not about seeking glory, but about being ready when ordinary people needed extraordinary help.